Hello, everybody. This is Professor Joseph Holbrook, continuing our series on Christian history. We are in the second part of week 12, the Age of Missions. And this particular section I'm adding on. It's not in the textbook, but on this particular subject, I felt that like the textbook was just a tiny bit Eurocentric. And so I wanted to add some additional information that's not in the textbook about some very early Afro-American Christian initiatives in Georgia, South Carolina, Jamaica, and also in St. Thomas Island. So today I want to talk about these folks who are Rebecca Proughton, right over here, and her husband, Mr. Proughton, and their child, and George Lyle on the right. And these are two missionary individuals, three, I guess, but the focus is on Rebecca Proughton and George Lyle, that are just amazing stories of missionary work. So Rebecca's book story is taken from Rebecca's Revival: Creating Black Christianity in the Atlantic World by John Sensback, Harvard University Press, 2005. Excellent book. I highly recommend it if you get a chance to read it. And so let's begin. So this young girl named Shelley, no last name, arrived on St. Thomas Island in the mid-1720s. She was 6 or 7 years old. She was brought there to be sold in slavery. She had been stolen from home, one of the nearby islands. She was alone and frightened, and she was just one more of hundreds of men, women, and children who arrived every year in chains to be fed into the flesh bazaar on St. Thomas, as John Sensback phrases it so eloquently and brutally. She arrives in St. Thomas. This is a big change, a big turn in the young girl's life. It's perhaps the critical factor steering her to freedom. She's bought by the Beaverhout family, who are Dutch. There are Dutch settlers and sugar planters that are living on a Danish island. Lucas von Beaverhout was her owner. She was treated fairly well. She was made a household servant. A few years after she was purchased, Lucas von Beaverhout died in 1730. She must have been about 12 years old, and his son Adrian inherited her. Beaverhout's mother and sister begged him to grant freedom to the girl. Apparently, she had developed a good relationship with the Beaverhout women. Some planter families, like the Van Beaverhouts, might have continued to believe that Christians should not enslave one another. And because she went through a spiritual conversion, they decided to grant her her freedom. So even after she continued to live with them and work for them after she was granted her freedom, she was promoted to manager of the household. At the age of 18 in 1736, Rebecca met a German missionary man named Friedrich Martin, who arrived in St. Thomas to preach the gospel from a Moravian point of view. Moravians were German Lutherans, and they were pietists. So he was a member of the Moravian Church. It was a pietistic Protestant sect based in Germany that had recently begun a quest to convert the world's non-Christians, and had chosen the black men and women of St. Thomas as their first target audience. Their adherents, the Moravians, were known for their Christ-centered beliefs and their strict obedience to the New Testament. Moravians were expected to undergo a profound conversion experience and cultivate a heartfelt relationship with Christ, whose blood emancipated mankind from sin and religious dogmatism. So there you see the roots of evangelicalism in Lutheran pietism. They also abided by a strict Christian code of conduct. Ditto. Moravian women were actually treated with great dignity and given a central place in the identity of the church. This is a bit of an anomaly in this time period, the 1700s. In Moravian doctrine, women were considered spiritually equal to men. The other religious movement that contains this emphasis on the equality between men and women was the Quaker movement, which predates Moravians maybe by 100 years. So here's a quote from Count Zinzendorf, who was the leader of the Moravians. He says, "With him, none come up short. And he also does not prefer one person to another," wrote the Moravian leader, Count Zinzendorf. "He loves with an inexpressible and inimitable equality." Moravians also treated blacks and people of color as absolute equals, and they often intermarried. Although, interestingly, the Moravians were not attempting to oppose slavery or advocate for abolitionism. Nevertheless, they treated blacks and people of color with dignity and with equality. They just were not revolutionaries who were attempting to overthrow the order of that time, unlike the Methodists under the leadership of John Wesley. We'll talk about them another time, the Methodists. So Rebecca was very engaged in traveling all over St. Thomas by foot, walking, teaching, counseling, preaching, making converts. In many ways, she might be considered a early apostle of Afro-Caribbean religious movement, or Afro-American. She eventually was invited to marry, and she married a young missionary man who died on the trip over to Germany on their boat. And after she arrived in Germany as a young widow, she was also given great honor among the Moravians in Germany and considered to be a leader. She learned Dutch and German. I think she also spoke Danish. After an appropriate period of time in Germany, she was encouraged to marry another Moravian of color, Christian Jacob Protten, the African. A Danish father. He was born of a Danish father and an African mother. And so she ended up marrying Christian Protten. Let's see if I can find the picture. There's a picture of the happy family, Christian Protten and Rebecca, now Rebecca Protten, and their child, whose name I do not recall. So here's a quote from page 9. "But it was here on St. Thomas in the 1730s that something else happened, when a solitary young woman began trudging daily along rugged roads through the hills in the sultry evenings after the slaves had returned from the fields. Known then only as Rebecca, she was not yet 20 years old, and she had made herself an apostle for Christ. She was a preacher and a mentor, a provocateur, and a prophet, determined to take what she regarded as the Bible's liberating grace to the people of African descent. She broadcast her message in the only way an evangelist can, by carrying it directly to the people. Her long peregrinations to the slave quarters deep in the island's plantation heartland, where she proclaimed salvation to the domestic servants, the cane boilers, the weavers, the cotton pickers, whose bodies and spirits were strip-mined every day by slavery. Rebecca's light brown skin was the product of a mixed African and European parentage. She was a former slave." And so, there's so much more that I can say about her. I hope you'll consider getting the book and reading it. She went through tremendous amount of persecution with her first husband on the island of St. Thomas by the white planters and the Anglican elites, and held steady and held fast to her faith until she was allowed to go to Germany. She just to finish her story, she ended up, her and Christian Broughton were sent to Ghana, I believe it was, on the Gold Coast to be missionaries in Africa, where eventually her husband died again. She was a widow, and she actually lived out her life as a very solitary figure in Ghana. And kind of a sad ending in a way. So another story of another remarkable missionary is the story of George Liele, one of the most significant figures in the history of Christian missions. Is a freed Georgia slave named George Liele. Even though William Carey may be called the father of the modern missionary movement, George Liele left America and planted the gospel in Jamaica a full 10 years before Carey left England. So that's why I felt like I needed to tell this story. The Baptist faith, in this case, George Liele represents the Baptist movement, as opposed to Rebecca, which represented the Lutheran, I guess they're no longer Lutherans, the formerly Lutheran pietists called Moravians. So the Baptist faith originated during the Reformation in England in the 16th century. It emerged in the American colonies in the early 17th century, with the first church being established in Providence, Rhode Island, in 1636 by Roger Williams. From their earliest beginnings, the Baptists were persecuted as a people, not only because of their zeal, but also because they allowed slave Africans to enter into the church. It was in fact not uncommon in Virginia, where James Ireland, a preacher from Scotland, was reported to authorities for having preached to black people and allowing them to attend church. Now this was in a state that was Anglican, or Church of England. And they had I'm going to get a divergence here, but the Church of England was ambiguous about preaching the gospel and trying to convert their slaves in the Caribbean, because among the English they believed that Christians should not enslave Christians. And there was a tremendous financial motive, a tremendous profit in owning black Christian slaves. So what happens if they become Christians, and out of respect for their being a brother in Christ, you're forced to release them from slavery, and you take a tremendous financial hit or loss? And so unlike the Catholics, who always evangelized, if you can call it that, they always baptized their slaves and made them Catholics, the Church of England, or the Anglicans, really resisted allowing their slaves to come to faith, until the Moravians, Methodists, and Baptists came along, and then it began to change. So it was on one such plantation in Virginia owned by Henry Sharp, a British subject and a Baptist deacon, that George Liele, who was formerly named Sharp after his owner, was born and raised a slave. His birth happened about the time of the rise of the Baptist faith in Virginia, which seems to have been the result of the revival movement, the Great Awakening, that we already discussed in the 1740s. In 1770, Henry Sharp relocated to Burke County, Georgia, taking his slaves with him, and it was there, under the pastoral leadership of a Reverend Matthew Moore of Buckhead Creek Baptist Church, that Liele accepted Jesus Christ for himself in 1773. Liele was allowed to become the first licensed minister of African descent in the future United States, or America. This allowed him to preach 4 times a year to both black and white Christians. thereby taking his place as part of the global Baptist family. He went on to become the first African Baptist pastor of the first black church in the continental United States, Silver Bluff, on the Gulfin Plantation in South Carolina. He was ordained in 1775. It was while in this period of awakening that Lyle and his followers co-opted the notion that which was sweeping across the African diaspora of Ethiopianism. Ethiopianism was a movement that traveled across America, providing enslaved Africans with an independent spiritual, social, and political identity as people created in the image of God. It was a means whereby they, as an enslaved people, could assert their African identities as they worshiped God in the midst of an oppressive environment. Their foundation stone was the Bible, and particularly texts which referred to Ethiopia, the most significant one being Psalm 68:31, and I quote, "Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." Let me just point out here that when they use the word Ethiopia, it's equivalent to the word African. So Ethiopian, African were interchangeable words at this point. It was not referring to the modern nation state of Ethiopia. The American Revolutionary War began in 1775 and was fought primarily between the British and the Americans. Henry Sharp was a loyalist. He joined up with the British forces in Savannah, moving his slaves with him. However, he appreciated the ministry of Lyle, so he gave him his freedom so that he could preach freely in Georgia and South Carolina without restriction. Lyle chose instead to remain in the service of Sharp for another 4 years when Sharp was killed in battle. He founded the first African Baptist church in North America, now called the First African Baptist Church of Savannah, previously called the Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ. It was the first church within the developing African Ethiopian Baptist church movement, and as such were Lyle's skills and abilities that the church grew quickly, as did his reputation as a preacher and evangelist. Interesting that the British are the ones that gave him freedom and encouraged him to preach. In 1782, the British surrendered to the Americans, bringing the war to an end. And this meant that the British were also expected to surrender all their interests, their property in America at the time. And this included the slaves who had fought with them. Lyle himself was considered to be such property by the children of Henry Sharp, so they had him imprisoned in the hope of re-enslaving him. However, Lyle, fearing a life of slavery once again, produced his manumission papers, and so they had to set him free. This put in motion the urgent need to gain the freedom of his wife and children, to enable them to stay together as a family. He providentially received support from one Colonel Moses Kirkland, a planter and a member of the British Armed Forces. Kirkland lent Lyle $700 and agreed to protect him in Savannah. Lyle, together with his wife Hannah Hunt Lyle and their 4 children, George Jr., John, Lucy, and Paul, and about 3,000 loyalists with their 8,000 slaves, left the United States and traveled to Jamaica in order to avoid turning their slaves over to the Americans. Lyle traveled as the indentured servant of Colonel Kirkland, and of that decision in his relationship with Kirkland. He agreed to serve for 4 years as an indentured servant of Colonel Kirkland in exchange for the $700 that Kirkland gave him to purchase the freedom of his wife and children. So at this point, George Lyle creates what some might call a Pauline missionary company or missionary band. He had something like that when he was preaching in Savannah and in South Carolina. The 4 African assistants who traveled with him from the now United States were George Gibb, George Vineyard, John Gilbert, and George Lewis. Later additions were Moses Baker, a mulatto barber from New York, Thomas Swiggle, a colored Creole born in Jamaica, and Parson Kellick, an African Creole, and lesser-known persons such as Moses Hall, James Pascal, and Cupid Wilkin, many of whom the book that I took this from discusses later on. It was a missionary band of 10 men. Lyle brought with him from America a significant strategy for mission, which he called the hub and spoke evangelism. This, according to Samantha Futrell, was a system which Lyle had used with much success in America. Let me see if I can find a picture of it here. I think I created a little graphic to illustrate it. So you establish a church hub, for example, in the capital of Jamaica, and then out of that hub, as the church grows and flourishes, you send out teams and disciples into the surrounding areas to establish smaller groups that grow from that original hub. So Lyle did this in Jamaica and established a whole network of churches who were called Ethiopian Baptist churches in Jamaica. Unfortunately, they actually thoroughly evangelized large parts of Jamaica. Unfortunately, in the course of the 19th century, there were a couple of slave uprisings in Jamaica, and in 1865 it was no longer a slave uprising, but it was an uprising of people of color against white economic problems, white oppression, and many times Baptist leaders were pastors were the leaders of these uprisings, not necessarily affiliated with George Lyle or the Ethiopian Baptist movement, but eventually the London Missionary Society began to feel pressure to distance themselves from the Ethiopian Baptists, and there was a great deal of prejudice among the Anglicans against the Ethiopian Baptists because of their self-empowerment as African Jamaicans, and eventually they were persecuted to the point of nearly being hounded out of existence. And by the early 20th century, then Pentecostals and other Baptists began to arrive in Jamaica and found residual groups of Ethiopian Baptists which received them, and their movement was absorbed into eventually the Jamaican Pentecostal movements. So that's the story of African American missionaries who predated the Protestant missionary thrust that began with William Carey. Rebecca, 1730s, a great deal earlier than the Protestant missions represented by William Carey. And then George Lyle, at least 10 years before William Carey. So I felt like it was important to recognize them and give them a voice. I hope you enjoyed it. This section, I can give you a couple book references and my PowerPoint, but it's not in the McGrath textbook, which is a little more Eurocentric and overlooks some of these Afro-Caribbean and Afro-American movements. Thank you very much. Next week, week 13, we start with Christianity in the 20th century. Take care. Bye.